Welcome to Step Into the Pivot. We're your hosts. I'm Teresa Conti.
And I'm Ivana Polonio. We talk with people just like you. We have honest conversations about current issues that women and men face and how we pivot to address them in our lives.
This podcast is your companion as you step into a workout or take some time for yourself.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Step Into the Pivot. So we are in October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and definitely a month that is near and dear to my heart. I tend to wear pink, and if you're seeing us on YouTube, you will see that Eva and I both have our pink on. We are also joined by a guest, Andrea Nitta, and if you remember, Andrea was actually guest on episode 4, and she talked about her breast cancer journey. So welcome again, Andrea. We're happy that you agreed to come back and talk with us again.
Thank you both. It's wonderful to be back.
Awesome. So we're going to spend some time today talking about, we have 4 special episodes this month. This is episode 2 of our month where we're talking. And today we're going to talk about advocacy. And when we talk about breast cancer, advocacy is so important. So even I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit more and kind of get Andrea involved in our conversation today.
Thank you. And thanks, Andrea, for being here. I want to take us back to the conversation we had when you were talking about your journey in general, your pivot with your breast cancer experience in general. And one of the things you highlighted there was the experience of learning to ask for help. You are really always so, focused on helping other people. Teresa and I know that as your friends, as your coworker. I also experienced you know, your ability and agility in terms of, service and openness to being there for others whenever, that's needed. And you talked about how when you got the diagnosis and, then we're dealing with all sorts of, practical, physical aspects of that experience, learning how to self-advocate and ask for help was quite a lesson. And that was something that you personally had to learn how to do. Your family had to learn how to do too. So tell us about it, how that self-advocacy piece was really the first part about, unpacking advocacy in your journey.
Yeah, I think it was, entering the unknown and at some level not really knowing what kind of help was needed, but then also, as you mentioned, kind of the act of asking for it and speaking up and saying, this is where we need some help. Maybe this is where we don't. uh, and kind of then what that might look like for me personally, but then also, from a family dynamic as they were navigating things with me. And, honestly, we might be getting into this a little bit, but when I think of advocacy, I don't always think of myself first. I think of on behalf of others. And so I think as we're talking today, I think of today in kind of 2 ways, like for on behalf and for myself, which I've learned and continue to learn, but then also on behalf of others, because there's a bit of a pay it forward component somewhat naturally out of my journey that I think we'll get into here in a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks for saying that and thanks for pointing that out. And I think, maybe just kind of, you know, backdrop here for our conversation is that we're thinking about advocacy as an act of actively supporting cause, a person, a group. And, what you tapped into in our original conversation is how easy it is to omit ourselves from that definition. And in the context of, personal health challenges like, you know, encountering, then living with, then surviving breast cancer, thriving with breast cancer. Is it in my rearview mirror? What's going on for me? Advocacy will involve, both self-advocacy and learning to ask for the help and the resources that you might need during, different aspects of that, difficult time. And then also advocating for others. by providing that support. And so that can look like a specific thing, passing on an object to a person because
Mhm.
you've been through it and you know that this thing, hey, I've got this thing. I think it can help you when you're going to be dealing with this experience, but also sharing knowledge, but also sharing your heart. I know that there are times when you've received advice from folks by way of there were some like practical and tactical things. Sometimes it was motivational. Um, and then participating in broader efforts. I know you volunteer a lot. You just, had an experience volunteering recently. Can talk about that a little bit. So just wanted to like really provide that context for us as we engage more with the conversation. And let's use meal train as a good example of, all of these different aspects of advocacy. So you and your
Yeah, we
family, meal train.
yeah, we touched on that one last time because that one kind of opened the door um, for my husband in that I'm fortunate that he prepares the meals every evening for the most part. And so then when that was offered, it was initially like, oh, I don't need that. And then it was like, okay, wait, maybe we do. And then after the fact, it was like, oh, this is really nice. So that was a good way because it freed up time for him as well, which was good. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about, a handful of women that did offer certain, objects like you mentioned, or nuggets of advice or whatever it is. And I was willing to receive it, but there was a couple times when people would offer like, oh, my old neighbor or my old coworker or, somebody, do you want to talk to them? And while I certainly appreciated those extensions of, engagement, I was I kept it a little tighter in that I wanted it to be people that I kind of knew. And in many cases, I didn't know them well, but I knew them well enough and felt comfortable enough to reach out. So, I mean, it was probably less than 10 women, Teresa being one of them, where, just had an opportunity to kind of, um, what's the right word? Maybe debrief or kind of, uh, do the quick elevator speech of like what's going on in both directions, and then kind of come together and hear that individual's path, and then kind of how it helped me. And obviously, I had the benefit of hindsight now for some of those conversations, but whether it was a conversation or a box of things that showed up in the mail that ended up being really beneficial, and then I was able to pass them unfortunately to someone else, then fortunately or unfortunately to someone else who needed them, because this seems to be too common in many of our friends and families' lives.
It does. It's, that statistic that 1 in 8 women will experience this at some point in their life.
Yep,
I mean, and that's just breast cancer. I mean, there's other types of illnesses
of
clearly
course.
that, of course, some of us are navigating, right? And I appreciate saying that because I agree with you, Andrea, and I've said this before, right? And I think I even told you this. Everybody's journey is their own, but knowing that somebody else experienced this, and I say it when I talk to women, and I probably said it when I talked to you, is, just because that's what worked for me doesn't mean that you're right, but you at least knowing, and maybe it causes you to ask another question, or figure out something, or ask something about treatment or something else, right, that can help you. I think, to me, that's such a great piece of advocacy, just us being able to share our stories. And I think you were actually one of the very first people I shared my story with, because, and maybe we were put in that place together just for that reason, just for me to help you. And I know during your journey, I remember I would just text you randomly and say, hey, I was thinking about you, how you doing? And then a few times you're like, hey, do you have a minute that we could talk? And so that's what's always very helpful. So I hear you saying that, and I love that, we can help each other.
Yeah, yeah, it was really great. And I think it's also there's a relatability there, but also the knowing that I'm talking to someone who's on the other side now. And so then
Yes.
they, again, we have the benefit of hindsight and such, but it was just hearing and knowing that obviously wherever you are in the journey, but you'll get there and you're going to get through it.
Yeah,
To your point, it isn't going to look exactly the same. I have yet to talk to someone who said the exact same journey I have had, and I honestly probably never expect to. But just that relatability, and then there's just this immediate comfort, I think, too, in having that conversation, honest conversation.
absolutely. I absolutely agree with that for sure, right? It's just having a sounding board, just having somebody who knows. Let's talk just for a second, that there was sometimes that kind of flip side of that, right? Where, you maybe needed help getting to chemo or something else, and people would sign up, and then like you had the reverse. And can you just talk a little about that? And maybe we can put that in some context for our listeners.
Yeah, it was a little bit more on ending up having to manage something that I didn't want to have to think twice about. So sometimes, health issues and what I was going through aside, I'm facilitating this, that, or the other things on behalf of, maybe it's a work thing or kids scheduling or something, in our family life. And happy to engage at all the times, text so and so, call so and so, connect who, that sort of thing. But when this came around and it was like, okay, I can only do this for part of it, and so and so's going to come for the other part. I was very much like, just leave me out of it because I just want to show up, you know, get all plugged in, if you will, and get through what I got going on. And I didn't want to have to think about anything kind of extra, if you will. And so it was never anything particularly upsetting, I would say, but you do recognize the behaviors, and it wasn't everyone, of course, and it only happened a couple times. But then where I think I took it a little further was recognizing if I've ever done that to someone, like um, add kind of this layer of burden somewhat unknowingly, like it wasn't malicious, it wasn't, in a mean-spirited way at all. It was just kind of a little bit of just normal day-to-day type things come up, and you just maybe didn't think it through all the way because, we all are somewhat selfish at times in our own, what we've got going on in our schedules and managing it all. And so I think, nothing ever came to, friendship ending or anything like that per se, but it was more of, I think, my recognition of like, oh, I've probably done that unknowingly to someone else. And so maybe I need to be a little bit more thoughtful depending on, the circumstances of whatever was going on. It could even be, a work thing where you're like, okay, wait a minute, maybe I'm unknowingly adding too many questions or extra um, inquiries that, I could just figure out on my own, or I just can bring them up at another time, depending on what's going on. So I think that was the reflection there for me in that from that experience that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I remember, when you first told me what was going on, for those of you who listened to the first episode we did, you'll hear some of the comments along those lines. I remember being so upset at the news that my first thought was, what can I do? What can I do? And then that continued, and it meant that I did, have all sorts of thoughts about how I was gonna, quote unquote, help out in ways that were like, some of them were like physically not possible because I had trip planned to go back to Croatia where there were also all sorts of, things happening. So like it was like, Evie, you can't do that because physically you won't be in Portland. You can't sign yourself up for it.
Right.
For that. It's like, and then it was, how do I not make this your problem? It's not your problem. That's not something I should be vetting out with you now or your husband. Like, I would love to sign up for the meal train, but it's like, no. But it wasn't easy, and I'm sure that I've said things that were, not necessarily super skillful or, but I remember distinctly feeling really upset at myself for not being able to make a couple of these things that that I thought could be helpful, make them work. And so then you and I got creative It was specifically around I couldn't make one of the chemo sessions, and I couldn't sign us up for a meal train in a way that would have been helpful to you guys. So I remember actually coming up with a creative solution where it was like, I'm going to take you out when you're ready. You and I are going to go and have a meal together in a, in our old fashioned way, but that's going to
Right.
be
The
like, it
way
was
you
going to
want it
be
to happen.
purposeful. And then it was like, you pick, I'm picking you up, we're doing it. And it was just, so I'm offering that because it was a sweet thing we did that was, a little out of the norm. But one of the main reasons I want to bring it up right now, with basically we got creative with the process was part of the reason I was comfortable doing that was because at that point you also got really good at speaking up in terms of what would work for you. So
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, what would be helpful? And then you'd be like, come get me and we're gonna go have lunch and this is what I want to eat. And then I'm going straight home after that. Okay.
For a nap.
It was really good. So now that we're, 2 years out from your diagnosis and you're, recognizing these tendencies and you've learned so much and you are, so happy to reflect on the fact that you look great, you sound great, you are taking really good care of yourself. And I know some of your results are also really, really good. So that's wonderful. But you are managing a lot and you're managing it on a day-to-day basis. Can you tell us how you know, are becoming, and it really is an ing, like it's always becoming a go-to advocate for other women? How do you continue to take care of yourself and being there for yourself? And then also, I know that you're doing things that are not just one-on-one basis. You're participating in larger advocacy efforts. So tell us what this is like today.
Yeah. I think I mentioned the kind of the pay it forward component, and it does come naturally for me. I've always been, more of an extrovert, very, I care a lot about my relationships and fostering, long-term relationships and creating new ones and things. And so it is really being on the other side, and that I can be a resource should somebody want to pass along my email or name and phone number or whatever to have a brief conversation. A college roommate from many, many years ago in college shared my name and email with a friend of hers, and we corresponded a couple months ago now. And it was just a few times. She just had some general questions, and that was it. And that was enough for her. And I was happy to fill um, that for her. I don't know if I was one of, 25 people she emailed or two, and it didn't matter. Like I just kind of gave her my honest response. A couple other people have asked if they could give my name and phone number, and I'm always happy to, similarly to, how it was offered to me. And I think just having some sort of connection opens that door a little bit easier. So I'm always happy to speak to those folks. Sometimes I honestly don't even think too much about it because it is, it's just a nice conversation. I mean, it's unfortunate that the topic we're speaking about, of course, but if I can, share a couple little nuggets likely that have were either passed to me and or then I experienced, I think find that helpful. And then in August, I just volunteered at the local More Than Pink walk for Komen and had a nice morning, just registering people. And but you can usually tell who is currently the survivor or thriver or active patient, and just kind of words of thanks for being here, and I'm glad you and your family have a great day, whatever it might be. And that morning was really beneficial for me, and hopefully, for them. Hopefully they felt that too. And again, in many cases, they were, strangers, and I'm never going to interact with them again. And then just lastly, I'll mention I am potentially pursuing a board position on a local group that is, does a lot around breast cancer awareness, prevention being the main cause, but then support. I think their motto is something along the lines of anyone going through breast cancer doesn't feel alone, is kind of their genesis to their group. So That may materialize, and if it doesn't, that's fine. It just, I'm aware of the organization now. I've only known about them about a year, actually. And you mentioned, yeah, I'm kind of post 2 years, so I'm kind of coming up on some anniversaries and things that jump out on the calendar, and then I'm obviously very thankful that it's mostly behind me now. I'm not sure I
Yeah.
answered all your questions there, even at that.
I think you did a really great job with
Yeah,
that, honestly.
totally.
We're very happy that you're 2 years out. I mean, that's a big milestone. And when you get to year 5, I can assure you, you'll feel even better. And, as the years go by, you think about that and just think, how amazing that is. So, I loved this conversation about advocacy. It's really, to me, just like you said, it's just us being there for each other. If there's people listening to this, if you're going through this, Andrew and I are here. If you want to just talk or just hear some more of our story or listen to our first podcast that we did and talked about this, because it does help you. I also love that you said, it helps to know that somebody else came out on the other side and came out really in a great place. So that's very, very encouraging to everybody. I think I just have like one last question. If you could just talk about it briefly, how is this, this advocacy now pivoting you into, kind of moving yourself forward a little bit? Do you think that has helped you to kind of move forward from this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it certainly is day to day. It is maybe less top of mind as it was. But I'm still taking some medicine that unfortunately keeps that top of mind for another 6 months or so, and then likely beyond. But yeah, it is a little bit like, what am I doing for myself? What can I do for others? Thinking on moving forward.
I've seen you over the years do so much volunteering your time and advocating for causes that had to do with your kids and their well-being.
Mhm.
And here you are now. This is deeply personal. And you are still role modeling something for your daughters, your son, and
Yeah,
advocating
it's come
for
up in
something good for them.
conversation, in, just from general health perspective. And, ask always speaking up on your behalf. Do you have your appointments? If you haven't heard from them, engage with them. Our son has a ongoing issue that, he needs to manage. And as a 21-year-old, it's not top of his mind so much. So he just needs a couple reminders every once in a while. But also he needs to be on point because it's his life and his body, and to ask those questions. But my thought there was, we only have 1 year left of secondary school. So not that necessarily frees up your time, but I think we have a new chapter very close in our lives. And so then I think of that advocacy and like where else could I be spending time on behalf of others, whether it's related to breast cancer or something else. Maybe something focused with the kids, as you mentioned, or just um, other, interests and hobbies that my husband and I might have. Um, so yeah.
Amazing. And I will tell you, when you finally get to go off that medication, it does feel like an ending point. So I totally get where you're going with that. So, well, thank you again, Andrea, for being with us today. We really do appreciate it. Again, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We were so happy to have you tell your story the first time and continue that and help us kind of understand, how helping each other can really help you move forward too. So I think that's an important message. So thank you again so much for being with us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you to you both for this great podcast.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. And even though this is our special month, we do have our standing reminder for everybody that if you have a pivot in your life, step into it and let us know if you want to share your story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Step Into the Pivot. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights from our conversation. Remember, life is a series of pivots, and it's in those moments of change that we truly grow.
If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected, make sure to check out our websites. You'll find additional resources, behind-the-scenes content, and more details about our incredible guests. We love hearing from listeners, so reach out with your thoughts, questions, or your own pivot stories.
To keep the conversation going, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Instagram, where we share updates, quotes, and engage with our amazing community.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback makes a difference, and it helps us bring you meaningful conversations. We're signing off, reminding you that every pivot is a step forward. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Step Into the Pivot.